Hey guys, welcome to episode 1 of the Wild Wild podcast. I'm so excited to finally be talking to you guys today about all things environmental science. If you listened to the trailer that I dropped back in August, you would know that episode 1 was actually supposed to come a lot sooner, just a couple weeks after the trailer was released, but some things came up in August, so I decided to hold off and to upload in September. So thank you all for your patience and willingness to wait for episode 1. I hope that it is fun for you guys and that you learn something. Before we get started, I do want to remind you guys to follow the Wild Wild podcast on Instagram and Twitter. There you're going to find episode sneak peeks as well as more resources about the topics that we discuss. If you aren't already subscribed on YouTube, I suggest going over there as well and subscribing to the Wild Wild podcast channel, as well as clicking the notification bell so that you never miss an upload. Okay, now that is all out of the way, let's get into today's topic. So today we are going to be discussing the polar bear. I'm sure that pretty much anyone who is listening has heard of the polar bear. They are a pretty well-known species. You may have even heard that they are an endangered species. Today we're going to go into topic about the threats that they are faced with today, along with some interesting facts about polar bears. We're going to talk about food chains, the greenhouse effect, and also some ways that we can help aid in efforts to save these populations. I believe that when we are talking about endangered species, it helps to have a slightly more in-depth understanding about them, just to know about the threats that affect them, as well as to spread awareness. I also think that it is just fun and interesting to learn more about plant and animal species in general. So as far as polar bears go, they are actually considered marine mammals, similar to whales and dolphins. This is due to the fact that they typically fully rely on marine species as their food source, as well as relying on the oceanic ecosystem for survival. Being marine animals, they are very apt swimmers. Their front paws help them paddle long distances, while their back legs act much like a rudder on a boat, creating a very aerodynamic style of swimming. While they are exceptional swimmers, they heavily rely on the massive expanses of sea ice to travel, hunt, and mate. They are especially adapted for life in the Arctic. Their massive paws, which measure nearly a foot across, are covered in small bumps that allow them to grip the ice while traveling and helps them to not slip and slide around. Think of those fuzzy socks that we all love to wear in the wintertime that have those little bumps on the bottom of them so that we don't fall while walking on hard surfaces. Their paws are much like that. Lastly, another adaptation that they have to help them survive in the frigid environment that they live in is their skin and fur. Many people think of polar bears as being white, but their fur is actually translucent while their skin is black. These are very specific adaptations to help keep them warm. Because their fur is free of pigment, it allows sunlight to be reflected, and then their black skin then helps to absorb it more efficiently to maximize the warmth of the sun, which is extremely important to them as it is hard for larger mammals to keep warm in this frigid environment. Now that we have discussed some fun facts, let's talk about their population numbers. According to the International Union for Conservation of Nature, polar bears have an estimated 19 subpopulations across the Arctic ecosystem. While some of these population numbers are steady and a couple of them may even be increasing, the species as a whole is trending in a decline. This has led them to be placed on the IUCN's Red List of Endangered Species under a vulnerable status. This list is a comprehensive list of the world's most endangered, threatened, or vulnerable species facing extinction today. It's a great source of reliable information, so I highly suggest checking it out. It also gives some insights on what is threatening these species. So what does it it say about the polar bear? Today, we will be focusing on pollution and climate change, which are the leading causes of the decline that we are seeing in the polar bear's population today. In the Arctic, polar bears are one of the species most impacted by the threat of pollution. To understand why that is, we need to take a look at the food chain. The species that make up a food chain will vary depending on the ecosystem, but the structure is the same regardless. We need to start at the beginning of the food chain, and here you will find what are known as primary producers. These make up the foundation of the food chain and are comprised of plants, algae, and bacteria that undergo photosynthesis to convert sunlight into energy. They are then eaten by the primary consumers. This category is made up of generally smaller sized herbivores or plant eaters. These species are then eaten by secondary and in larger, more complex ecosystems, tertiary consumers. These categories are comprised of medium to large carnivores, which eat meat, or omnivores that consume both meat and vegetation. At the top of the food chain, you will find the apex predators. These are often the largest carnivores within the ecosystem and are generally well-known species like sharks, tigers, lions, and bears. So, the polar bear is considered an apex predator within the Arctic marine ecosystem. So, why is the food chain so important when it comes to the threat of pollution? Well, this is because pollution from toxic chemicals found within the environment are known to bioaccumulate. This means that the chemicals enter into the food chain when they are taken up from the environment through the primary producers. These plant, algae, and bacteria cannot differentiate between something good that it needs from the soil, like nitrogen, from something bad that it doesn't need, like these pollutants. Once they have absorbed it from the soil, it is then stored within them, waiting to be ingested by the primary consumers, and so on within the food chain until it reaches the apex predators. Not only are these animals being exposed to these toxins in their water sources, they are also consuming large amounts that are being stored within their food sources as well. So where do these toxins come from? Chemicals found in fertilizers and pesticides being used in the agricultural industry are some of the main culprits of water pollution today. Another pollution source is from industrial waste that is being dumped at alarming rates into river systems that lead to larger bodies of water, including lakes and oceans. While water pollution is a huge threat to many marine species, including the polar bear, air pollution may be even worse. Air pollution is the leading cause of climate change in today's time, and some of the most greatly impacted species of climate change live within the Arctic environment. As I mentioned at the beginning of the episode, polar bears rely on the oceanic ice to travel for hunting. Their main food source are ringed seals, and they hunt their prey by traveling long distances to find these seals and by waiting for them to surface before pulling them up to consume their catch. Unfortunately, climate change has had a drastic effect on the polar bear. According to the National Snow and Ice Data Center, in the past 30 years, the Arctic has warmed at roughly twice the rate as the rest of the globe. This has led to the decrease in floating ice in the spring and summer months, which directly impacts the polar bear. I know many people have questions about global warming and climate change. I hear a lot of people arguing, isn't climate change naturally occurring? Hasn't the Earth gone through natural periods of warming and cooling? And the answer to those questions is yes. Technically speaking, climate change is driven by a naturally occurring process known as the greenhouse effect. The greenhouse effect, if you don't know, is a phenomenon in which particular gases found within the atmosphere trap solar radiation or heat from the sun. These gases are known as greenhouse gases and include methane, nitrous oxides, and the most well-known carbon dioxide. Some of this heat is released back into space, and the rest is reflected back to the surface of the Earth, thus warming it. This process is actually essential to life on Earth as we know it. Without the warmth from the sun that is absorbed from these gases, we could not survive. But scientists have found that human activity, most notably the burning of fossil fuels for energy consumption and transportation purposes, releases excessive amounts of these greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, especially CO2. The more of these gases that are released into the atmosphere through pollution means the more heat is being trapped within our atmosphere and the faster the surface of the Earth is being warmed. Scientists have observed the direct correlation between increased greenhouse gases through human activity at the start of the Industrial Revolution and the expedited rate of global warming. This is a moment in history when many scientists say that human activity took over the natural process of global warming. We have to remember that when the Earth went through these historic periods of warming and cooling, that the climate and atmosphere were not as stable as they have been in the past 10,000 years or so. That is a difference, and the Earth has reached a level of stability as far as its temperature is concerned, which is what has sustained life thus far. Humans are now throwing this stability out of whack, and we will eventually breach the threshold if we do not take action now to reverse the effects of climate change. You may be wondering, why is it so important to save not only the population of polar bears, but all endangered species? And the answer to that question is biodiversity. Biodiversity, in a nutshell, is a variation of life on Earth at the genome, species, and ecosystem levels. Scientists can use biodiversity as a tool to determine the health of an ecosystem. If an ecosystem has a steady and high level of biodiversity or a larger variation of species, then it is more capable of functioning properly. Many people don't realize that ecosystems actually perform various services to nature and to humans, like disease and pest control, protection and shelter, water purification, and pollination, which fuels food production. These services are essential to life, and they can only reach their full potential when the ecosystem is healthy and thriving. This means that biodiversity is an essential building block to life on Earth. The issues that we discussed today, pollution and climate change, they threaten biodiversity. And in ecosystems where biodiversity is already lower due to the nature of the environment, these threats are magnified. This is true of the harsh Arctic ecosystem, where fewer species are able to survive in general. Scientists and researchers have been sounding the alarm for at least the past 3 decades, and their findings have fallen on deaf ears. They are now warning that if we do not act within the next 10 years, the climate crisis will yield irreversible damage. So what can we do? It can be discouraging to think about what has happened in regards to pollution and climate change. And while we cannot completely reset all that has occurred, it isn't too late to make the changes needed to preserve the Earth for generations to come. This will be a tall order, and it will require action from the individual level up to global cooperation. One of the most important things that we can do as individuals, especially here in the United States, is to make informed choices when we are voting. Who we vote for as our officials on every level has an impact on policies that either have the potential to help heal the planet or to cause further harm. These officials are the ones determining what curriculum is being taught in our public school systems across the nation as well. These officials are the ones determining what our country's energy source will be, and unfortunately, America and many other countries right now rely on fossil fuels, which in addition to creating pollution, are not a sustainable source of energy for the years to come. We as a nation need to be making the switch to cleaner, renewable sources of energy, like solar power, for example. Apart from informed voting, another way that we can help is by supporting the amazing organizations who are working every day for conservation and preservation efforts. There are around 20 to 25,000 polar bears remaining across the subpopulations of the Arctic, and they need our help. Wildlife Collection is an online shop that works in partnership with Polar Bears International. Their website states that if you purchase a beautifully crafted bracelet, a portion of the proceeds go to Polar Bear International, and you will also receive information on your very own polar bear to track. I think that this is a really cool way to, 1, become more connected to the cause, and 2, wearing the bracelet can be a conversation piece for someone else, which is a great way to spread awareness. I will make sure to link their website along with Polar Bears International in the description box on YouTube, as well as tagging them both on Instagram so you can go check them out for yourself. yourself. If you end up purchasing one of the bracelets, be sure to leave a comment and tell me which one you got, along with the name of the polar bear that you were tracking. I will also link a couple of organizations that work directly against the threat of climate change if you were interested in giving or learning more about them as well. I really hope that you guys enjoyed today's episode. And again, if you ever have a particular species or topic that you want to know more about, let me know. I'll talk to you guys in the next one. And as always, stay wild.